We are going to start now. I think we are ready. We have waited for some time now. We should have started anyhow. I think it was beyond our control. And we are meeting here as the steering committee today, where we have invited the department to come and brief us. We are meeting here during the lockdown because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, honorable members, we are meeting on the 25th day of June month, where in 1976, June on the 16th, took up to the street saying enough is enough. And they were doing that because they wanted to liberate us. They did what has been done previously before by our mothers in 1956. We also want to salute the youth in our parliament that are busy having their dialogues of the youth parliament. Even today, I think some were on that dialogue from 9 o'clock until 14 hours. Under this lockdown, honorable members, we are experiencing a high number of gender-based violence and femicide, where we are losing a lot, or we lost a lot of women and children that were raped and also killed. Yesterday, a 3-year-old child was laid to rest. Today, seated here, one of our members from the National Assembly, Mama Dora, was laid to rest. We also lost one of our members, Mama Tandi, from the DA. I don't know when is she going to be laid to rest. May their souls rest in peace. Honorable members, I think all this is happening in our watch. But as women of this country, I think under this lockdown, honorable members, we are experiencing a high need to do something in order to make sure that this gender-based, where we are losing, we be able to deal with it. That were raped and also killed. On the book of Esther 4, verse 14, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance of your Jews will arise from some other places, but your relative will die. I take it like, as women of this country, if we're going to keep quiet about what is in our country, about the pandemic that we're facing, about gender-based violence and femicide, if we're not going to take a stand as women, it means the country is going to die. It needs us as women. It needs us to stand National Assembly, Mama Dora, and fight this scourge of gender-based violence. Honorable members, we are meeting here, inviting the department to as the steering for us in order to have the plans that for the broader caucus. I also believe that we all have our agenda that has been circulated by our secretary. Secondly, I want to check with the secretary if there are any apologies. Mandy, is there any apologies?
Yes, Chair. Ms. van der Merwe is ill and she cannot join us, but is represented by Ms. Flengwa. And the Deputy Minister has apologized. She has prior commitment. She has a prior commitment, as well as Ms. Nube Ndaba. She is also not available. Ms. Pilani Majake will join the meeting. She has joined the meeting, but she's just experiencing technical difficulties, but our IT section is trying to sort it out for her.
Thank you. Mandy.
Yes, Chair?
Can you please keep on checking? When you see that I'm offline, please talk to the whip to take over. Like now, I was offline.
Okay, I will.
Do we only have one apology?
We have three apologies.
From your side?
Yes.
Did you receive only one?
I received 3, Chair. 3 written apologies.
Mandy? Hello? From the department, do we have any apology? Hello? Honorable members. Honorable members, Mandy, do we have any other apologies? How many? You said how many apologies?
We can
Is it all from honorable members? Mandy? She's lost. Okay, can we proceed? Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister.
Honorable Chairperson.
Honorable Minister.
Here is the Honorable Minister. Can you hear me, Chair? Here I am. May I start?
Honorable Minister, if
Hello.
it's you who is going to brief the steering committee, can you do that?
Okay. Honorable Chairperson of the Multi-Party Women's Caucus, members of the Multi-Party Caucus of the Multi-Party Women's Caucus, can you hear me? It is indeed a great pleasure to engage with you today. I am looking forward to a fruitful discussion on the National Strategic Plan of Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. I would like to express my concern at the recent spate of violence and horrific murders of women and children. This morning, I was receiving a memorandum from an NGO called Enough Is. I received this memorandum on behalf of the President at the Union Buildings. At its core, gender-based violence and femicide is a manifestation of a profound lack of respect and failure by men to recognize the inherent inequality and dignity of women. It is an issue of fundamental human rights. Men and women are equal human beings and are protected by the Constitution of South Africa, particularly the right to life is enshrined in the Constitution of South Africa. South Africa will center its efforts on bringing about specific changes around the following 6 pillars: accountability, coordination and leadership, prevention and rebuilding social cohesion, stopping violence before it happens, and a national drive towards shifting away from toxic masculinity, restoring human dignity, and rebuilding the social fabric. Efficient and sensitive criminal justice system, adequate care, support, and healing, building women's economic power, and better information management to inform action. The IMC, the Interministerial Committee formed by the President after the adoption of the National Strategic Plan was adopted, is busy establishing a National Council on Gender-Based Violence, which will consist of 6 government. 6 is already available. It's myself, Minister of Police, Minister of Justice, Minister of the Treasury, Minister of Public Service Administration, Minister of Social Development. We will then be augmented by the 7 representatives of all the civil society representatives in our country. The council will be supported by broader technical working groups and teams at national, at provincial, district, and local municipality level. Currently, to kickstart the implementation of the NSP, my department has called on all departments to integrate NSP, National Strategic Plan targets into their APPs and strategic plans as they reprioritize as a result of COVID-19 pandemic. As part of coordinating the implementation of the NSP, 1, the department will be asked to submit reports detailing the percentage of funds spent on COVID-19 that went to the women's and this then the NSP. On the 11th of March 2020, Cabinet has approved, as I said, the NSP, which is for 2020 to 2030, and the establishment of the council I referred to earlier. Cabinet also approved the setting up of the IMC, which I've already spoken to earlier. Once the council is appointed, the council will become the custodian of the responsible for the driving and its implementation. The Emergency Response Action Plan, ERAP, that we implemented between October 2019 and March 2020 demonstrated that working together, we can achieve more than working in silos. Similarly, the NSP is based on the understanding that a multi-party sectoral approach is central to effectively addressing the gender-based violence and femicide effort and affront. The NSP set out to provide a cohesive strategic framework to guide the national response to the hyper-endemic gender-based violence and femicide crisis. South African women are really in a crisis. They are dealing with a double whammy situation of having to be fighting against the pandemic called COVID-19, and again, the pandemic of being killed even in their bedrooms. The NSP vision is a South Africa free from gender-based violence and femicide directed to women, children, and LGBTQIA persons. To achieve this, women's economic empowerment and inputs into the gender response budgeting amid COVID-19 pandemic would be very important. As of the 30th June, weekly progress reports co-signed by government and civil society will be submitted to the President. Whilst establishing the National Council, we have started to implement pillars based on interim technical teams constituted by both government and civil society representatives. The interim technical teams have a task to popularize the NSP at the district and local municipality levels in order to mobilize communities to actively participate and join the fight against gender-based violence. We are also busy with a communication strategy, media campaigns to inform, educate, and raise awareness to influence attitudes and behavioral change in the society. The presentation today will give an overview of the NSP development process and the finalization. The success of gender-based violence NSP's efforts will depend on all stakeholders moving beyond differences, building meaningful relationships of trust, and finding ways to work together. Inkomo, malibongwe. Thank you, Chairperson.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Mandy.
The chair is experiencing connectivity problems. Is it possible for you to just chair in the meantime until the chair is sorted out?
Oh, no problem. I understand that we're supposed to be receiving a presentation for the strategic plan for the department.
Yes.
So I understand the minister was doing an input
Yes.
to just give a guide on what the work that has been done by the department so far. So can we allow the department to then give us their presentation? Perhaps on the engagement, we'll then engage the input from the minister equally with the presentation. Can the person assigned to do a presentation go ahead?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and to acknowledge the Honourable Minister and the Honourable members. My name is Dr. Annette Grisel. I'm presenting
Thank you very much, Minister, for your briefing.
Go.
And who's going to brief us from the department?
Dr. Grisel, she's sitting right
The
there.
one who's going to give that overview you were talking about.
Yes, yes, madam.
Thank you, Honourable Chairperson. Shall I proceed?
Hello?
Yes, Honourable Chairperson, this is Dr. Grisel.
Yes, you can proceed, Doctor.
I'll proceed. All right. So I'm going to give an overview of the National Strategic Plan on gender-based violence and femicide, which Minister has already spoken to. The focus of the presentation will talk about her background, the rationale, how it was developed, the situation analysis of the GBVF in South Africa, the problem statement, the purpose, the scope, and the pillars, the principles and the pillars. We can go to slide 3. So I think members would be aware to a large extent of the background to the development of the National Strategic Plan. There has long been calls for a national and cohesive strategic approach of the country as a whole by government and civil society to combating the scourge of GBV. We know that there was also a review of the National Action Plan by the Department of Social Development, and there was increased mobilization and activism organized, and there was the historic march by Total Shutdown and other women's movements on the 1st of August 2018 to the union buildings. There was subsequently a presidential summit in November of 2018. The next slide. At that summit, a very important milestone was the development of a GBVF declaration. This arose from discussions leading up to the presidential summit, including base documents generated by task teams, as well as there were a number of commissions at the summit. And I think what was critical from the start, it has been civil society, government playing a critical role together, crafting these recommendations that were discussed at the GBV summit. And we know also that this was a presidential summit that was addressed by the president and also addressed by a number of the ministers. The declaration consists of 19 articles that reflect the recommendations emerging from the summit to address the critical issues that had been raised by the delegates and by government and civil society together. That declaration was eventually signed by the president and representatives of civil society formations and social movements on the 28th of March 2019. Article 3 and Article 4 specifically outline the tasks of developing a national strategic plan which has the support of all sectors of society and is properly resourced. And I think also Article 4 You may not be able to read it, it's quite small, the writing, but that's also spoke about the national multi-sectoral coordinating body, which would be championed by the president, and that it would be established subsequent to the summit itself. Now, the approach taken to the drafting of the NSP, because that was one of the critical tasks, and I think members would also be aware that an interim steering committee made up of civil society and government was established after the summit to take forward the key tasks outlined in the declaration. Some of the key characteristics of the approach taken to the drafting of the NSP, because that was the primary task of the interim steering committee, there were already a number of baseline documents, as indicated. But critical to the process was that there should be a proper consultation, that there would also be existing government frameworks would be taken into account, as well as engagement with teams. The journey towards the development of the NSP, there were extensive consultations, including in the provinces, Eastern Cape, and the details are available. The Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Western Cape, Limpopo, Northern Cape, Mpumalanga, Gauteng, Northwest, and Free State. Those consultations are also, there was also online feedback and submissions that were provided, as well as specific sectoral consultations to obtain various inputs. Now, the other inputs, as I have indicated, was that there was already the revised program of action that had been developed by the Department of Social Development. There were the 24 demands from the total shutdown movement with the march of the 1st of August 2018. There was the Presidential Summit Declaration. There were also a number of consultative multi-sectoral workshops, including design workshops. Various teams were established, ongoing engagements, and the production of Draft Zero as a basis for further consultation. The process also entailed reviewing feedback, identification of and budgeting for immediate issues relating to the NSP, fine-tuning the overall strategy based on feedback, developing a revised document alongside the M&E framework. The costing process was also underway, as well as internal review processes throughout government. Just to say, the ERAP, in this time, there was also the Emergency Response Action Plan, and I'm sure members would also remember when there were further marches around September 2019, and a special parliamentary sitting. The president also addressed, and the minister addressed protesters and social movements outside Parliament. That was when the ERAP was developed, and that was also a very, very critical component. So the response was to say, we're not going to wait until the NSP has been finalized, because the NSP, while it was underway, the Emergency Response Action Plan was developed in the interim period from October 2019 to March 2020. What were some of the considerations also that were taken into account in developing the NSP? I think what was firstly, and the rationale for what would the approach that would be taken. I think the first one was an effective criminal justice system. Many of the women who spoke at the GBV Presidential Summit on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide spoke very passionately and tragically in many cases about how the criminal justice system had failed them and how they had suffered a secondary victimization, often at the hands of various components of the criminal justice system. What also informed the approach was people said we want safe transport lighting and drugs. And we all know the stories of women being raped and murdered on their way back from work, coming home, and so on. Also, the issue of substance abuse, alcohol abuse has been seen as a contributing factor. The whole issue of policing remains critical in our country and often at the center of an effective response to the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. But there was also the Interim Steering Committee also initiated the issue of rapid response teams at a local level. So not just having policy documents, but ensuring that where women live and where women work in their homes and in their families, that there are rapid response teams. The Minister has spoken about the issue of the women's economic vulnerability and how that is also a critical contributing factor to addressing gender-based violence and femicide. Parenting interventions were also highlighted in that the manner in which we raise both our boys and our girls in our families and in schools has often been raised. Now, in terms of the context, because that's obviously critical in understanding in terms of the NSP, what is the context within which this occurs and how we also deal with the problem. I think the first key point about the context is around understanding the magnitude of the problem. Gender-based violence and femicide is not just a small social problem or a social problem affecting just a small section of society. It affects every population, but it doesn't only affect women and girls. It affects families. It affects everybody that is affected by GBV and femicide. Critical in the context as well is the whole issue of the history of institutional violence in our country, particularly in the context of colonialism and apartheid, which were both systems that were built on institutional violence. So that institutional violence is still embedded within our societies. And it's important to understand that as we seek to understand and better respond to the GBV and femicide crisis. The other key approach that we need to take into account when looking at the context is the whole issue of a whole of society approach. As I indicated, we will not be able to this is not something affecting just one small sector of society. It doesn't only affect individuals, it affects individuals, households, communities. In fact, there's very few sectors or institutions of our society that are not affected by gender-based violence and femicide. And that also points to the need that when we respond to gender-based violence and femicide, we need to also take a whole of society approach. There's also the critical contextual factor that GBVF takes place within the context of high overall levels of crime and violence in our society. And that GBV and femicide is itself a crime, but it is within the context of high levels of crime and violence, a violent society that we continue to have. In terms of the purpose, the purpose is to provide a multi-sectoral, coherent strategic policy and programming framework to strengthen a coordinated national response to the crisis of GBVF by the government of South Africa and the country as a whole. So I think the principles of multi-sectoral, a national and a comprehensive response by the country as a whole is very, very important. The vision is that all people in South Africa, particularly women and children, are and feel safe, enjoy happy and healthy lives, relationships and social connectedness access to humanizing sensitive services, fully able to realize their right to autonomy, bodily integrity, and equality. The principles are that it should be multi-sectoral, it should complement and augment existing frameworks. There should be active and meaningful participation, but also visionary, transformative, and be forward-looking. It should be HR-based, survivor-centered, inclusive. There should be inclusiveness, diversity, and intersectionality. Intersectionality being a key concept when we look at issues of gender. In terms of the scope of the NSP, it focuses on comprehensively and strategically responding to gender-based violence and femicide, with a specific focus on violence against all women across age, physical location, in other words, whether urban or rural, women with disabilities, regardless of sexual orientation, sexual and gender identity, gender expression, nationality, and other diversities. And as well as violence against children and how these serve to reinforce each other. So that is the scope, which is the next slide, I think. I think there's perhaps a lag in the, yeah, so I've just looked at the scope. I'll now look at the vision. So the next slide is on the vision. And I think the minister has also spoken about this vision. A South Africa free from gender-based violence directed at women, children, and LGBTQIA+ persons. I'm now going to just unpack a little bit the principles that I had already listed. So we're now on slide 12, yes. So the multi-sectoral approach is critical to optimally harness the roles, responsibilities, resources, and commitment across government departments, different tiers of government, civil society, movements, youth structures, development agencies, the private sector, academic institutions, and all stakeholders. So I think this really underpins the approach that has been adopted from the start. It's not just a policing issue or a justice issue, or it's not just about social movements. It's about there must be a multi-sectoral approach. The issue of complementing, the principle of complementing and augmenting existing strategies. So the NSP acknowledges that there has been work done on GBVF before. There were existing strategies and instruments and national initiatives on GBVF and safety in the country. So the NSP builds on those. It complements and augments them, and the NSP provides a much more comprehensive and multi-sectoral approach. The other important principle, critical principle, is that there should at all times be active and meaningful participation of communities, civil society, various movements, and those most affected by GBV in the design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of the strategy. So this is not about people sitting in offices and developing strategies. No, it's about the principle is that the strategy must be developed and implemented with active and meaningful participation of communities and civil society. The important principle also is that a visionary, gender-responsive and transformative approach should be adopted that takes into account inequality and gender-driven differences driving gender-based violence and femicide. In other words, this acknowledges that gender-based violence and femicide is one of the foundations of gender-based violence and femicide is precisely unequal gender relations within our society. So the principle is that we should be gender responsive and gender transformative. The other important principle is a human rights-based approach and victim-centered and survivor-focused approach should be adopted in the provision of services and make sure that these reach all without the risk of financial hardship. On to the next set of principles, that the plan and the approach should be intergenerational and should also be youth-friendly. So it should be aimed at not just the older women and so on, but also it should be suitable to young women and to youth in general. It's acknowledged also as a principle that there would be a progressive realization of outcomes through the prioritization of reforms and strategic partnerships to address wider systemic challenges. Systemic challenges are those that are not just addressed through a particular action, but they require consistent and focused and concerted actions and outcomes to be achieved in order to progressively realize those outcomes. A further principle is that it should be forward-looking in the co-creation of a different social milieu, underpinned by respect, compassion, and human dignity for all. So this is also about creating a new society which respects human beings and is compassionate. Mutual accountability for changes. This is also recognizing that the outcomes achieving the outcomes requires government, civil society, communities, social movements, the private sector, development partners, and all stakeholders to work together to drive the agenda forward. So government must be held accountable, but so too must other partners be held accountable. The principle of inclusiveness, embracing diversity and intersectionality is very important. Also recognizing the importance of foregrounding women's experiences, particularly the most marginalized by poverty, race, age, ableness, sexual orientation, gender identity, and nationality. Now, the Minister has outlined the key pillars of the National Strategic Plan, and I will then elaborate on those. I'll go straight into elaborating on, but also the critical principles underpinning this graphic shows the critical principles underpinning the pillars of accountability, responsiveness, prevention. I'll move straight into looking at the different pillars. I think pillar one is very important in terms of accountability, coordination, and leadership. And this is about, firstly, ensuring bold leadership, strengthened accountability across government and society in a manner that responds to GBVF strategically with clear messaging and adequate technical and financial resources. So these are all critical components to achieving the successful implementation of the NSP. We can't have, if leadership is very important, but if there's no technical and financial resources, then leadership will also not be sufficient. The pillar one also addresses the importance of strengthened multi-sectoral coordination and collaboration across the spheres of government and sections of society based on relationships of trust that give effect to the pillars of the NSP. In terms of pillar two, which focuses on prevention and rebuilding social cohesion, firstly, this is about making sure that public spaces are safe and violence-free, particularly for women, the LGBTQIA+ community and children. There should also be strengthened delivery capacity to roll out evidence-based prevention programs. So it's not enough to have a plan which then, or a policy without having the actual capacity to implement that on the ground and to implement evidence-based prevention programs. The third component of this pillar is about changing behavior and social norms within key groups as a result of the rollout of the evidence-based prevention program. So ministers also spoken to this about there's currently already work underway on looking at behavior change and changing destructive social norms which perpetuate gender-based violence and femicide. This leads then directly also into the need to shift away from toxic masculinities towards embracing positive alternative approaches for expressing masculinities and other sexual and gender identities. So this is not about saying that there should be no masculinity, but it's saying let's move away from toxic masculinity towards more positive expressions of masculinities and other gender identities. Then there should also be an optimal harnessing of programs against violence against children that obviously will impact on the broader GBV eradication. There should also be, and in this pillar looks at the increased of prevention interventions on violence against the LGBTQIA+ persons with a broader GBV prevention and violence prevention intervention. So this is identified as an important component of the prevention and social cohesion pillar. And then finally, within this pillar, strengthen programming that addresses the restoration of human dignity, builds caring communities, and responds to the historic and collective trauma. And we've spoken earlier on about our context of institutionalized violence over centuries and over generations. So we need to have a deliberate focus on healing within our various communities and restoring human dignity. This pillar also looks at the assumptions that around change is required at all levels, and this is about transformation at all levels, and this links up to the whole of society approach. And the focus here should be on society as a whole. It should be at the community level. It should be at the individual level. It should be at the family or the household level. It should be at the relationship level, and it should be at the level of children, the manner in which we rear our children and the values that we bring our children up with, whether it be in the family, in the schools, in the different social institutions. Pillar 3 is about justice and safety and protection. It's about having an efficient and sensitive criminal justice system. What are the key deliverables here? All GBV survivors must be able to access efficient and sensitive criminal justice that is quick, accessible, responsive, and gender inclusive. So the example that we heard in the media, I think it was yesterday, where a rape victim was told to go home and come back to the police station the next day. That must never happen again. It cannot be allowed to happen. So we need GBV survivors to be able to access efficient and sensitive criminal justice, quick, accessible, responsive, and gender inclusive. There must also be strengthened capacity within the criminal justice system to address all impunity, effectively respond to femicide, and facilitate justice for GBV survivors. There's also a need for amended legislation related to GBV, specific GBV areas that builds on the legislative reforms initiated under the Emergency Response Action Plan. Pillar 4 is about response care, support, and healing. The key components of this are firstly strengthened existing response care and support services by the state and civil society in ways that are victim-centered and survivor-focused to facilitate recovery and healing. Also, secondary victimization must be eliminated through addressing specific individual and systemic factors that drive it. And we've seen this continues to happen within the court system, within police stations, and so on. So this, there needs to be interventions to stop that secondary victimizations. Victims must feel supported by the system to access the necessary psychosocial material and other support required to assist them with their healing. There must also be strengthened community and institutional responses to provide integrated care and support to survivors and their families that take into account linkages also between substance abuse and HIV and AIDS. Pillar 5, the issue of economic power, women's access to the economy, an inclusive economy, very critical. This includes accelerated initiatives that address women's unequal economic and social position through access to government and private sector procurement. There's quite a lot of work happening there. We know that there's the procurement bill, which has been published for comment. The deadline for comment on this procurement bill is 30th of June. So we are also working with other stakeholders to make inputs into this to ensure that it is gender responsive. But also within this power, issues of employment, housing, access to land, financial resources and income, and other income generating initiatives. Also critical are safe workplaces that are free from violence against women and LGBTQIA+ persons, including but not limited, of course, to sexual harassment, where women continue to face sexual harassment within the workplace. Also, we need a demonstrated commitment through policy interventions by the South African state, the private sector, and other key stakeholders to eliminate the impact of economic drivers of GBV. We need to also strengthen the child maintenance and related support systems to address the economic vulnerability of women. We know that this is a critical issue where women are left to fend for their children on their own and struggle to get maintenance from their former partners. Pillar 6 is on research and information management. So even though we have increasingly improved the research and the NSP itself involved research, this is an area that needs continuous focus, particularly so that we have evidence-based interventions. So we need to have an improved understanding of the extent and nature of GBVF and the way in which it manifests itself broadly and in relation to specific groups and the forms it takes in South Africa. So we need to build the knowledge base around this. And, you know, one of the proposals one of the decisions of the NSP is to create a GBVF knowledge hub. This will also allow for the adoption of GBV policies and programming interventions that are evidence-based, that are informed by existing evidence and research. But also ensuring that GBV-related information is generated across government departments and across government information management systems, and that this is readily used to address systemic challenges and facilitate effective solutions and responses. In terms of the implementation modalities, the Minister has spoken to these. I'll just cover them quickly. The first is the establishment of a permanent multi-sectoral coordinating structure in the form of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. Here we have a slide on the various structures. The Minister has spoken about the Interministerial Committee. Parliament also has a critical role to play in this. We have the Minister in the Presidency responsible for women, youth and persons with disability, who is the national focal point and who also chairs the Interministerial Committee established by Cabinet. There will also be, the Minister has also spoken about the Council with its 13 members made up of civil society and government. And then the idea is that there would also be provincial working groups and local working groups, so that it becomes a structure that functions at all levels of government and society. Then in terms of the National Council on GBVF, this is the custodian of the plan and plays a very important strategic oversight role to realize the national outcomes outlined in the plan. And it essentially will also play the role of driving this plan overall. The IMC plays a key facilitation and political liaison role. The presidency would work to ensure that government allocates adequate resources. Parliament, the role of Parliament would be to ensure that the structure is governed by a statutory framework and provides oversight through the minister in the presidency. The presidency, led by the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability, will provide overall coordination of the IMC and government and coordination of government departments, and will facilitate institutional coherence across government. Also very important would be the national gender machinery, which would be a key part of the existing policy frameworks and the institutional modality, the implementation modalities. Minister has already spoken about the National Council being 51% of its members coming from civil society. The Secretariat will drive the technical support in rolling out the 6 pillars. The different government departments are supposed to align their outputs within their 5-year strategic plans, but also within their annual performance plans, so that the NSP must find expression within the plans of government departments and within the budgets of government departments. Working with and through key strategic government departments and civil society networks and organizations will also be key in the implementation modalities. And then the issue of accountability, so building national, provincial and local accountability for an urgent, comprehensive and all-inclusive response. The Minister has spoken about the weekly reports that will now be coming so that they would be accountable at the highest level of government. Development partners have and will continue to play an important role in aligning their investment into GBVF eradication in South Africa in terms of the priorities articulated in the NSP. And then the critical area also of costing of the structure and the GBV and GBVF in general. But this, if we don't have budgets, then our commitments will be a lot weaker. So an initial costing exercise has been undertaken, and the various role players, the department and the other role players are currently working together with the departments, agencies and National Treasury to look at a reprioritization of APPs and ensure that resource allocations include the GBVF and NSP targets. And the overall slogan is that there must be human dignity, healing, safety, freedom and equality in our lifetime. Thank you very much. I also want to, before I close, acknowledge that we do have with us the DDG for social transformation, who's responsible for the GBV issues, Ms. Shoki Shabalala, who I'm sure the members would be familiar with. And we also have with us the Chief Director of Governance Transformation, Justice and Safety, Ms. Esther Maluleke, who will also assist in responding to the questions. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Ms. Nkomo?
Hi, Mindy. Chairperson, because I can see she's online.
Yes.
She's having connectivity problems. All right, no problem. Thank you so much, Doctor, for a very comprehensive and insightful presentation. Without any waste of time, I will allow members to engage the presentation equally with an input from the minister that was made earlier. So I don't know, maybe on your side, do you have any hands that would like to engage?
Ms. Sharif just said in the message box that she wants to raise a question, Chair, Ms. Nkomo.
It's only Ms. Sharif.
Oh, for now it's just Ms. Sharif.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Sharif, you can come through. Ms. Sharif? Honorable Sharif?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. You didn't mute yourself.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And thank you for the presentation from the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities. I must say that I'm very excited to have this presentation by the NSP. And I know this is a multi-party women's caucus, but as a portfolio committee, we've really been looking forward to get you to come to the portfolio and present the NSP. And I think it would be a very good idea to do that as soon as possible. But I just have a couple of questions. Let me start with, I'm just going to go down there. So the first one is, the Minister, you said that there'll be 7 reps from civil society. Can you just tell us how they'll be appointed? I know that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Minister, but there is meant to be posts that go out to the public to advertise.
Thank you very much.
So can I continue, Chair?
Yes, you can continue.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to find out, and maybe you can just tell us what the process is on appointing those members of the council and how it will be done. The next thing I want to speak about is on slide number 24. You said that the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities will provide an oversight function to the implementation of the National Strategic Plan. But then on the same slide, it then says that it will coordinate the overall the coordination of the IMC, the government departments, and institutional coherence. So I just want to find out, how are those separated? Because it seems to me, and I could be wrong, it seems to me that hello, Chair, that we're doing oversight over yourself. So maybe you can just clear that up for me. And then when you spoke about the ERAP, Minister, you said that the ERAP stopped, ended. I suppose, I guess you said it ended in 2020 so that it can be replaced by the National Strategic Plan. It would be great if we as a multi-party women's caucus could see exactly what the ERAP has done, how it's been implemented, and what are some of the lessons perhaps that departments have learned with implementing the ERAP moving on to the National Strategic Plan. In terms of the consultations that has been done, I want to find out, how did the department or the interim steering committee go about inviting civil society to participate in the consultations? Can we maybe also get a list of those stakeholders, Doctor, that have been consulted? Chairperson, that is, and one more thing from my side is, how exactly will the National Strategic Plan change social norms and toxic masculinity? And I think this is a very important point, because this is exactly what needs to happen. It's that the social norms and the social practices needs to be ripped up. That invisible social contract women have seemed to have signed needs to be completely ripped up. And I think perhaps but maybe it goes in deeper a little bit in the NSP, is that schools play a really important role in this, and perhaps we can look at how the reproductive classes and those things that are being implemented, perhaps to look at consent classes and how we dismantle patriarchy and gender norms within those things. Now, Chairperson, if you will allow me, I have been contacted by stakeholders to pose some questions to the Minister and to the department. So the first one is, what
does the NSP mean by decriminalization of sex work? So that's the first question from my constituency. The second question is about the consultations. The third question is who are, and maybe you can speak about the GBV survivors. Do they include people who have been prostituted? Yes, and then from another stakeholder, they asked me to ask you, Minister and Department, is did, when putting the NSP together, did the team consider and maybe did research and studied the effects of pornography on gender-based violence and femicide? Thank you very much, Chairperson. Those are my questions, and then questions from my constituencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Sheriff. Honorable Chair, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, Honorable Nkomo.
Yeah, we were taking questions. The only person that has raised their hand was Honorable Sheriff.
Okay.
So you can take over from here.
Thanks, Honorable Nkomo. Honorable Minister, I think I also have one question to ask you. And I also want to thank Dr. Annette for her presentation. But somewhere, somehow, I sometimes fell off along the way. But I managed to get some part of her briefing. Honorable Minister, your department is playing a critical role of the overall coordination. But Honorable Minister, as the member of Multi-Party Women Caucus, I just have the feeling that as multi-party, it's like we're left behind. Since you know that our mandate is to lobby and also to do oversight, I just want to propose that is it not possible that Multi-Party Women Caucus or members from the Multi-Party Women Caucus do form part of your council? And when you are in your open issues that you spoke about a team that is constituted about by the executive. And you said that the team will be district multi-party can be given reports in order to thanks. Oh, lastly, Honorable Minister, the issue of I know that now you are just presenting a strategic, but while presenting the strategic plan, there are a lot of things happening now because of the COVID-19. The departments and the municipalities are busy working on the programs to solve the COVID-19. But women, youth, and people with disabilities are left behind. But we are saying, as women, we want also to
Chairperson, the network, I think it's bad on your side. I could hardly hear anything that you were saying. Hello, Chair. I don't know whether, Doctor, did you manage to get what the chairperson was raising?
Only a few of the issues, but not all of it.
Oh, okay. Chair, you were breaking, could hardly hear you, but let's hope that, Doctor, that the issues that she has captured, she will be able to respond. But as and when she responds, where you are not satisfied, you'll then come back, because your network is very bad. I could hardly hear anything that you were saying. Can you hear me, Chair?
Honorable Nkomo.
Yes, Chair.
What were you saying?
I'm saying when you were posing your question, you kept on breaking. So we could hardly hear what you were saying. So I was just checking with the doctor to say, did she manage to capture what you were saying? She said she managed to capture a few of the things that you have said. So I'm saying, let's give the doctor an opportunity to respond. Where we are not satisfied or where we are not covered, we'll then come back.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Okay, doctor, you can respond. You said you have a team that you are with that can also assist in responding to other questions. But
thank you,
Honourable. To come through.
Thank you, Honourable Nkomo. I will start with the DDG Shabalala and Chief Director Maluleka will add. In terms of the representatives from civil society organizations, so on the 13th of June, the Minister led a consultation with the civil society organizations representatives to precisely discuss with them on what the appropriate method should be for their own appointment. So we said, the IMC and the department said that we're not going to tell civil society how they should be appointed. We said we want civil society to themselves, particularly the organized formations of civil society, to themselves respond on how the representatives, the 7 representatives from civil society should be appointed to the National Council. And that includes issues such as, the key criteria. So that process is underway. Now, in terms of the question also raised by Honourable Sharif around the terms of, oversight and coordination. So the way we see it is that centre of government departments such as ourselves, and it would obviously include departments such as Treasury and DPME and DPSA and so on, we have a dual responsibility to firstly coordinate. So we do some implementation of interventions, but our primary role is to coordinate other government departments and to ensure that they, in fact, are doing the work that they are supposed to do within the National Strategic Plan. And then, we understand that the primary oversight institution in our country is Parliament, but I think the term is also used within government so that, for example, the Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability would also exercise oversight to some extent in relation to the extent to which other government departments and ministries are indeed implementing their roles. So often people would use the term monitoring, but I think that the sense is that it's a bit more than monitoring. Monitoring implies that you're just checking, okay, social development, how many shelters do you have? We've got the following number of shelters. Whereas oversight is a little bit stronger in a government context in terms of also assessing whether the interventions have been implemented within a government context. So, but I mean, that that is a so the IMC would also play an important role, and the National Council, as the overall custodian, would in our view also play a oversight role in terms of the realization of the overall plan and the outcomes intended in the plan. In terms of the IRAP, yes, so as we said, that was it was developed as a 6-month plan, October 2019 to March 2020. There is a report on its implementation, and I'll ask DDG Chabalala or Ms. Maluleke to just speak to some of the key lessons and the key progress that has been made in that regard. I know also that the President, when he addressed the nation recently, also did speak to some of the key progress made in the IRAP. In terms of the consultations, obviously there is that information available. I will again ask the two colleagues to speak in detail, and you know, the participation in that regard. The issue of how did the IMC invite CSOs, I think we've addressed that issue. How will the NSP change social norms? This is obviously, I think, one of the most critical challenges that we face in our society, and it relates to the manner in which social norms are constructed in the first place. So social norms are established within a society through multiple practices and implicit understanding that is reproduced through multiple social institutions, whether it be families, schools, cultural practices, faith-based practices, and so on. So it's constructed through multiple social institutions. And how do we then reverse those social norms? How do we begin to the term that Honorable Sharif used was, how do we dismantle patriarchy? Because the two reinforce each other. So in an unequal society, the inequality and the unequal gender and other social relations are reproduced constantly through different social institutions. There's in fact a science in terms of how does one dismantle social norms? How do you change behavior? There are various. There's quite a vast literature on behavior change in different settings. So you know and part of it is through the mass media. Part of it is through the issue of schools. Apparently, we've been informed by the Department of Basic Education that they have already started to look at the curriculum to understand, and I think it's not just about, well, you know, maybe sex education, it's important, but I think it's also about the embedded norms and assumptions that are built into, whether it be into a science class or into a history lesson, or the manner in which girls are supposed to look in their school uniform. So there are multiple, you know, practices and that need to be dismantled. And you know, I think at some stage, once the full work of behavior change has been completed, and there will obviously be consultation around that as well. Part of it is also the mass media. You know, the mass media also plays an important role in reproducing the various norms and practices in our society. You know, if we take the example of the communication around the COVID-19 pandemic, it has also been about behavior change. It's been about, and it's been done through, you know, frequently repeating messages. Here the message is much simpler. Here the message is wear a mask and observe social distancing, for example, stay at home, etc. And how has, if we look at how has that message got across to people, or hasn't got across, we can also learn lessons from there. But I think that the issue of how do we change social norms is definitely something that we need to grapple with. The issue of decriminalization of sex work and the definition of GBV survivors and porn, I will leave that to my colleagues. Then, Honourable Chairperson Bilankulu, I heard the Honourable Member was talking about the department's critical role in terms of overall coordination, and I then lost the sound there. My apologies. But I think we have spoken about how we see our coordination role, but I'm sure that my colleagues would like to add. In terms of the Multi-Party Women's Committee and the mandate of the committee to do oversight, the Honourable Member proposed that the Multi-Party Women's Caucus should form part of the council. I think the NSP has already been approved and does outline, who the members should be. But I want to just also, I think everybody acknowledges the critical role of the Multi-Party Women's Caucus. If the strategy is to be multi-sectoral and multi-party, I think the Minister also said that the eradication of GBVF requires a multi-party approach. So, I'm not going to try to answer the question of the multi-party committee's caucus's role, but just to acknowledge that this is clearly has to be a central role. Then the Honourable Chairperson also spoke about the issue of COVID-19 and that women, youth and persons with disabilities are being left behind. Just to say that if we look at there are various structures within government around how government is developing and implementing its response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I think firstly, there's the National Coronavirus Command Council, which is chaired by the President and where our Minister also sits. We also have the NAT joints, which was established early on as far back as January, and all the Directors General do consider and deliberate on the presentations before they go to the NCCC. And the NAT joints, there's various work streams that do the work. They are intergovernmental work stream, interdepartmental work streams. We have been very active in the social impact work stream, where we have been contributing and in fact, we have been ensuring that the issue of gender-based violence and femicide is a permanent item on the agenda of all these structures. And not just being a permanent item, we also help to ensure that GBV is related services were essential services, because we were getting reports that the NGOs that were seeking to help those who reported cases of domestic violence were not getting access. But we changed that, and then that there were also referral pathways that were developed specific to so there were various interventions there. We have also been as a department making inputs into ensuring that women, youth and persons with disabilities are part of the economic recovery plan, because the president has also, been clear, and I think that the new economy that we rebuilt after the COVID-19 pandemic, or even now in under level 3, it must be a more inclusive economy. Let me leave it there, and my apologies if I didn't hear all the other questions. And I will also ask DDG Chabalala and the Ms. Maluleke to also respond, if I may. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Doc. Ms. Maluleke, can you take over?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I just take a few of the questions, perhaps also to add to what the ADG has already responded to. Starting with the question about the study of pornography and whether we've looked at this issue. Indeed, if you go right at the back of the strategic planning document, you will see a whole list of literature that was reviewed that attests to the fact that the strategy was not only based on the views and needs of beneficiaries, which is mainly women, through consultations that we've had, but also we did a lot of quite extensive literature review to look at all aspects of issues that impact on gender-based violence. So yeah, there's a list of literature that just gives an indication of what kind of material we looked at. The issue around decriminalization of sex work, I hope I got the question right, but just to say, this strategy at this stage, I think we had an extensive debate and engagement with as interim steering committee, but also the drafters of the strategy and the experts that were advising us. We left the issue open simply because we are advised also by the Department of Justice that this issue is a complex one and there are no converging views about what discrimination of sex work is, and whatever policy and legislation that needs to be looked at and developed will really need to make sure that it's aligned to the laws of the country and discrimination. So we didn't take a particular position regarding the strategy, but acknowledge that this is an issue that still needs to be resolved, that we need to work on as part of responding to gender-based violence. The issue around Iraq, it's a lot of, if you look at the pillars that we focused on during the emergency response plan, there's quite a number of things that were done that we plan to do. I can just take the issue of the access to justice, which is one of the pillars that we looked at and tried to implement. We had a number of activities that we actually implemented. For instance, making sure that there's available evidence collection kits at police stations, which are rape kits, adult sexual assault, pediatric sexual assault, and DN referencing. We also strengthened family violence, child abuse, and sexual offenses units, and trained. For instance, we trained, of those units, we trained 312 policemen and deployed them. I'm just giving examples because the list is quite long. We looked at the issue of cold cases, and we had a task team that was established by Department of Justice on the 1st of October last year. and has since analyzed 785,000 dockets relating to sexual offenses. In terms of behavior change, we continue to have campaigns, mass media campaigns, including during 16 days of violence against women. Commenced with the gender-based violence and femicide sensitivity training targeting law enforcement officials, prosecutors, etc. I'm just running through, yes, for instance, with response and victims and survivors of gender-based violence, social development created 200 posts for social workers, which were approved, and they started the process of appointing of those social workers. The NPA sought to upgrade 5 new Tutuzela care centers and identify sites in 5 provinces. And we had Rapid Results Initiative, which was piloted in the Eastern Cape, because we need to find a model of responding at local level. As the ADG said when she was presenting, the approach of this strategy this time around, it's really working locally at community level, because that's where gender-based violence happens, in homes, in communities, etc. So we really need to have models and strategies of responding, which we have not honestly done well as a country in doing that. So we had this, piloted this rapid response model in the Eastern Cape to actually test the model that we conceptualize and see how it works. Unfortunately, we were hoping that by now, by end of March actually, that project would have been completed, but it was interrupted by the COVID-19. We are still finding ways of continuing with the implementation of that model, and we hope to have a report soon. So I just really lifted a number of issues that were achieved during that period, and there's a report actually, the IRAP report, that gives more detail about what was done and what the challenges were. The last example I just want to give under the economic opportunities for addressing women's economic vulnerability, which is another pillar that the IRAP looked at. We contracted 319 participants in 254 participant and municipalities and districts, and to actually assist us with responding to gender-based violence. So just to talk through the challenges and lessons learned with IRAP. The challenge is the scale, obviously, of gender-based violence. It's huge. That's why we say we are in a crisis. We also have a challenge of finding effective ways to address systematic challenges. Fixing the plane as we fly, that's another big challenge. As we try to improve systems, plan as the honorable member said, we are busy implementing NSP, but also, you know, the crisis is just really, it's moving faster than we're able to respond. The sense of emergency agency means changing the way we work. And I referred earlier on about how the system responds. Firstly, it's us fixing the system, not only the criminal justice system, just as government, how we program the interventions that we put in place to actually respond to violence. It's things that we need to change and continuously work on. We need to have proper systems, models of implementing this strategy at a local level. I can give an example of some of the things that we need to revisit and look at local level that can assist. The issue of structures of community policing forums. You know, we need to revisit those structures and a lot of other local structures that needs to assist us to work on the program. Working together as government and civil society process, it's a continuous learning process. we continue to be challenged as we move along, but it's one relationship and partnership that we recognize is necessary. It's not easy, but with working as an interim steering committee, we've learned the lesson that it's actually possible, despite the differences that we might have and challenges. The other big problem, and it's not only, it's mainly the problem even within the department itself, is the issue of dedicated capacity to actually have full-time home bodies that actually drive this NSP on a daily basis and actually ensure that things that we've committed to do, we actually do. The last big challenge that I want to highlight is the challenge of reporting and accounting by departments. It's one big challenge that we have, especially as a department, where we would send templates, we will request certain information, and the information doesn't come by. Or if it does come, most of the time it's too late. So the issue of coordination, it's really a challenging one. But it doesn't only refer to government. Also, we tested the idea of reporting as multi-sectors that were sitting on interim steering committee. And we continue to be challenged and have a gap of civil society itself sending us reports about what they were doing to implement some of the agreed activities that we had under IRAP. And the challenge of now trying also to broaden the scope and bring other sectors like labor, the private sector, and also to report on also what they are doing to establish, to implement the national strategy. Going back to my last point on changing social norms, I think ADG dealt with that, but we also know that literature and research tells us that changing behavior and norms is not an easy task to do, and there's no one silver bullet. I think our approach, and is the approach of this strategy, is that we have multifaceted entry points in terms of how we tackle the issue of patriarchy. It doesn't only involve education and campaigns and trying to influence people's thinking and behaviors. It's also going to take us having programs, for instance, around parenting, going back to institutions like education, especially basic education, including ECD, ECD facilities, looking at the curriculum. What is it that we're teaching our kids so that already they grow up with a particular type of mindset, and instead of us trying to correct at a later stage. So I'm saying changing norms is going to take different strategies and tactics to do, and there's no one silver bullet. And yes, campaigns work, but we've seen that campaigns, changing behaviors doesn't only take a 16 days of activism campaign. There's much more work that we need to do. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Tabalala.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon to all the members of the Multi-Party Women's Caucus. I have been covered a lot by the acting DG as well as the Chief Director, Ms. Maluleke. There's one area that is remaining. You posed a question around departments and municipalities are key and working on COVID-19 plans, and you would like to see us being more involved. I'd like to indicate that in the district municipal plans, we have included the GBV issues to ensure that GBV is part of COVID-19 district dashboard. And that is going to enable our ministers and deputy ministers who will be visiting districts in ensuring that they mobilize communities to fight the pandemic, but also encouraging them to address the whole issue of gender-based violence, in particular, the whole issue around culture and the silence of members of society, including family members, not addressing this matter. Facilitating or activating what you would normally call neighborhood watches teams, but in this instance would be either your street committees or your ward-based approach. Those are the areas that we are elevating sharply in our district model plan. And also lastly, making sure that we establish rapid response structures at community level. Work a lot with your traditional leaders on the ground of faith-based organizations. And as we conclude the discussions around the issue of district model, we would like to upscale the implementation of the National Crime Prevention Strategy, particularly pillar number 3, that's environmental design, because that pillar is very critical in ensuring that public spaces are safe, like regular cutting of grasses. We've seen a number of women were killed in spaces that are full of trees and grasses and all of that. We would like to bring back that part and work quite closely with municipalities as well as communities and societies in this area of work. The rest, I am fully covered, and I would like to hand over to yourself, Chair, if there's anything else that has not been responded to by the department. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You covered everything. I just want to check if there is another hand that seeks clarity on something that has been said now. Mandy, is there any hand?
Yes, Chair, Mahlengwa would like to speak.
Okay. Mama, it's your chance.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'd like to welcome
Mahlengwa.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mommy.
We can hear you.
Proceed.
Thank you. I want to welcome the presentation. It was a superb presentation. Thank you very much. Well planned from the minister. Well planned. Thank you very much. But mine is not the question. It's already input from what you have said. Now we are talking about schools, ECD. I'm just now looking at the primary and high schools, because in the primary and the high school, they are life orientation. If we include the ECD, that will come with something, because from ECD, they can see that bully, our children, they are bullied. If we can put this program in a manner that we should, how to treat a girl child as a boy child, going to primary, look at the life orientation, because in the primary, they just look where the girl child have the period. But now we must include boys, a boy child, to how to treat their sisters, how to treat their schoolmate, classmate. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this input. I thank you.
Honorable Chair. Honorable Chairperson.
From the department.
Okay.
Anyone to respond from the department?
Yes. Thank you, Honourable Chair. And thank you, Honourable Member Hlengwa. I think the points raised by the honourable member are very critical, and I think it was an input which we would embrace, wholeheartedly, including, life orientation, ECD, looking at, the boy child and the girl child, and addressing things like bullying, because, bullying also, can be an early manifestation of violence that can, result in gender-based violence later on in life. So we welcome those inputs from the Honourable Member Hlengwa, and we will definitely take that forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your response, Doc. Honorable Minister, are you still around? Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, are you still with us? Secretary, can you check for me if the minister is still around with us?
Yes, Chair, I'm checking now.
Honorable members, can we continue if the minister is not around with us?
Yes, Chair.
Honorable members.
Chair.
I would like to take this opportunity and thank the department for their presentation and the responses they gave to us. I'm also happy they touched the issue of decriminalization of sex work. And the answer was straightforward. That issue is still need some time to be worked on. They raised a lot of issues that need to be taken care of. And I believe that when we call the department in order to give briefing to the caucus, they are going to give us a lot about this. And some of the issues that has been raised, maybe they will be corrected by then. Thank you very much, the department and the minister. If there is no other hand, I think the department can leave us and the steering committee will remain in order to deal with the business. Only one item left in our agenda. Thank you very much, the department.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair and Honourable members.
Thank you. Secretary?
Yes, Chair.
I think now we're to deal with the proposal to host an African Women webinar.
Yes, Chair. The document.
Joy is the one to present it.
Yes, Joy is going to present now.
Okay, all right.
Chair.
Joy, can you take us through?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, honourable members. So I won't be long. I'm going to talk was a request to do something to commemorate Pan-African Women's Day, which takes place on the 31st of July after recess has ended. And the initiative is aimed at honouring the Pan-African Women's Organisation. So the speaker had asked that I put together a draft proposal.
I'm sorry, Joy, you're breaking. I don't know whether it's on my side or is the place where you are now.
Sure. Can other members hear me? Is it on my side?
Yes, we can hear you, Kelly.
Okay.
I can hear you clearly, Joy.
I'll try and talk louder, Chair, and hope that the connection is good. I don't know if Mandy can also check from her side. So the proposal is that I have drafted is a draft concept, and the speaker had asked that this comes through the Multi-Party Women's Caucus for your input before it is finalized. So the idea is that we would host a webinar, and the webinar would focus on COVID-19 and the impact on women's lives and livelihoods. So the idea was that we would engage in looking at what has the impact of the coronavirus been on women's lives, in terms of looking at both the economic situation as well as gender-based violence. So, and we took as our background in looking at the economic impact of the coronavirus on our society, some of the work that has been put out by the International Labour Organization, where it has been estimated that a very significant number of women have been very, very severely impacted by the coronavirus. And when we look at our own context in the Global South, we know that many of our women are employed in the informal sector. And so the pandemic has a very disproportionate impact on women. For women who own small, medium, and micro enterprises, many of them have gone out of business and are not able to put food on their tables. And then when we look at the social protection mechanisms that have been put in place, even though we have this, it has not been enough in terms of ensuring that people have enough to eat and that they have income security. So we look particularly at the women in vulnerable sectors of employment, like in the informal sector, domestic workers, farm workers, sex workers, and women with care responsibilities who have taken great strain on their lives in the past few months. And then this, if we look at the impact of corona, together with the fact that women in the informal economy sometimes struggle with aspects like regular hand washing, wearing personal protective equipment, and where social isolation is not always an option, it makes them particularly vulnerable to coronavirus infection. So what we want to also then look at is what has been the impact of the coronavirus in terms of women working longer hours. So for women who, for example, are now working from home, when we look at the fact that many of the daycare centers and the schools have been closed for a period of time, what is the impact in terms of how women have taken on more of the care work in their families and in their communities at the time of the pandemic? And so we look at the fact that they're working longer hours, they get less sleep, and they have less time for looking after their own health and well-being. We look also at the fact that before the coronavirus outbreak, that there was an estimated 16.4 billion hours that was spent in unpaid care work across the globe, and the bulk of this is performed by women. I'm not going to go, honourable members, into the details around gender-based violence because the discussion on the NSP has talked about some of that, and it is in the document that has been attached. But safe to say that we know now that domestic violence was a pandemic in its own right before the outbreak of the corona pandemic. So we have the corona pandemic and we have a gender-based violence pandemic, and the intersection of those two things create a particular kind of situation in which we see violence being intensified, and we look at how the impact of people living in close contact for extended periods of time and what the impact of this has been in terms of exacerbating gender-based violence. And then we also look at the fact that this is happening in a time where service provision is compromised because the life-saving care and support like clinical management of rape and mental health and psychosocial support can be disrupted when healthcare workers are overburdened and preoccupied with handling COVID-19 cases. So within this context, the idea was that the webinar would create an online platform for members of parliament to engage with civil society. So it would be our civil society, our members of parliament, and a platform to engage on these issues. but that the suggestion was also that we would extend this to the SADC region and include members of the SADC parliaments as well. So we wanted to keep it relatively simple, and the idea was to ask two questions. What are the gaps in the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of securing women's economic productivity? And what is the gaps in addressing gender-based violence? And then secondly, how can parliaments improve our oversight in this regard? In terms of who would participate, we're looking at all members of parliament. We're looking at the Pan-African Women's Organization, the SADC Women Regional Parliamentary Caucus, and the C19 People Coalition network of members. Honorable members, we also know that just from the way these webinars are working, it is better to do it over a shorter period of time rather than having something that goes on for a day or so. So the proposal is that it wouldn't run for more than an hour and a half to 2 hours maximum. And as I said, the proposal is for Pan-African Women's Day on the 31st of July. I'm going to stop there, Chairperson. My role from here is to take into account the comments that come from honourable members, and that will then be included into the revised proposal that goes through to the Speaker's office.
Ms. Nkomo?
Hi, Mandy. I also lost connection. I was disconnected for a few seconds. But anyway, thank you so much for the proposal from the Speaker's office. Let's allow members to engage on it, to have a bite and hear what is our take in terms of the proposal. I'll allow members to speak on the item. Any hand, honorable members? So, in the absence of any, Ma'am Hlengwa, do you want to speak? Unmute yourself, Ma'am. Or you fine? Okay. Any hand, Mandy? Honorable Sharif?
I'm fine.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Ms. Nkomo?
Hello,
Honorable Whip.
Oh, you back, Chair?
Honorable Nkomo.
Yes, Chairperson. Honorable Chair.
I'm saying I would love to ask questions, but I didn't hear what she was presenting. I was offline. But I wanted to check with her, since she was saying that the speaker received this, whether it's an invitation or a proposal. Then the speaker said it needs to be escalated to the multi-party. I just want to check if they are going to assist in all the arrangement in order to see or to find this day as a success on our side as multi-party. And the rest, you'll update me. Thanks.
Okay, you can come through.
Chair, just to answer you on that one, the institution would assist in doing all the arrangements, so we would not have to do that by ourselves. It would be taken care of.
Okay, I think what the chair wanted to know, what would be the role of the multi-party women's caucus in regards to the arrangement in the preparation and the role on the day of the event.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I think that was what I was meant to take back is in terms of how the caucus would like to see their role playing out. So if that we could have a discussion around what the caucus would like, how the caucus sees its role, and that I can then build into the document.
Honorable Nkomo. Honorable
Yes,
Nkomo. Yes.
Yes,
You were spot on because I wanted an indication to say, as multi-party, this and this and this is going to be done by us. Unlike a situation where we find ourselves being told maybe a day before to say, you are going to do this and this. But I think what I was suggesting is that we need to be taken through or to be updated on each and every step in preparation of this, in order to find ourselves not as visitors, but to be owning the program or to be co-owners of the program. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. I think you were spot on. But I think from what the office of the speaker wanted to find out from us is that to have an input on what the program should be like, if I'm not mistaken. But perhaps because this is a presentation that we're receiving it for the first time, maybe my proposal would be that let's allow members to I saw even the something that Mandy emailed to us, to go through it, perhaps in our WhatsApp group. Would then do our own inputs. If there's the absence of inputs now, let's allow maybe until Monday, allow members to digest the proposal. It's a new thing, of course, that came to all of us. And I see Comrade Ron to comment on something that maybe they're not that much clear about it. Let's allow it until Monday through our WhatsApp group, where our secretary is part of. Then we then get to submit our input in terms of what must be the role of the multi-party on the day. I don't know, it's my proposal. Can members maybe say something on that in that regard? Or Chair?
No, I think there's nothing I can add. Let us all go through the document that has been sent to us in order to have the know-how or to get the gist of the matter concerning this. Then we'll take it up. Thanks, Honorable Nkomo. I think in the absence of any hand, it means now we have come to the end of our meeting. And thank you very much, honorable members and all staff members, the support staff. What we need to take care of, honorable members, is that coronavirus is real. Let's observe it. Let's maintain issue of social distancing. Let's put our mask when we go out of our houses. Let's take care of ourselves and take care of our extended families. Those who pray, let's pray for the nation. Maybe God